I'm Alex Dykes of thetruthaboutcars.com, and today we are out here taking a look at the refreshed 2016 Audi A6. Now this particular model is the 3-liter supercharged model, which in theory competes with things like the BMW 535i or the Mercedes-Benz E400. Now for 2016, this is not a complete redesign, but a relatively severe refresh touching the interior, the exterior, and what's going on under the hood. At just over 194 inches long, the A6 is one of the longer entries in this segment, but it's a little bit more unique than that because this is also one of the only entries in this segment that starts as a front-wheel drive vehicle. Really just the RLX, the S80, and the A6 come in front-wheel drive forms. Now the version we're taking a look at here is not front-wheel drive, of course, but the engine is still all hanging out entirely in front of the front axle, as we've come to see from Audi's Quattro system. Now that does take a little bit of a toll on the handling dynamics of this Audi model, like many Audi models, but it's not as big as you might think in this version because Audi has done a significant amount of work to try and shift as much weight from the front of the vehicle to the rear of the vehicle as possible. There are 3 different engines under the hood of the A6 for 2016, and then of course the S6 gets a unique engine as well. Things start out with a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, but the model we're taking a look at here, of course, has their 333 horsepower 3-liter supercharged engine. Now if you want the turbo diesel, that gets the 3-liter turbocharged diesel, not involved in the Dieselgate scandal, that produces 240 horsepower and 248 pound-feet of torque. The transmission of choice is an 8-speed automatic transmission in most models. Now if you get the 2-liter turbocharged engine, by default that comes with a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission and front-wheel drive. Fuel economy comes in at 20 miles per gallon city, 30 highway, and 24 combined with this 3-liter supercharged engine, but real-world fuel economy does seem to be a little bit lower than that. We've been averaging around 22. Audi has refreshed the front to give it a slightly angrier appearance. We now get HID headlamp standard. LED headlamps are optional like our particular model has. The biggest change up front is that you'll notice all the kinks in the grille and the general design are a little bit harsher. We have a little bit stronger angles, sharper angles all the way around. The overall restrained and elegant theme that we've come to expect from Audi continues out back. We get these slightly angrier tail lamps, but everything else is very conservative. We have an integrated spoiler here that's well done into the trunk lid. We don't have a whole lot of harsh angles or curves or that sort of thing going on in the back. We do have well integrated exhaust tips in the back, and we get a slightly different treatment to this area under the bumper. Audi has long been known for their excellent interior designs, and that continues in this A6. We have excellent fit and finish across the dashboard, across this real wood trim that is standard on this model. You'll see that's something that's optional in many of the competition. We also have very comfortable seats standard, although you will find slightly more comfortable seats in certain versions of the Mercedes E-Class and the BMW 5 Series. 2016 also brings a refresh to the Audi MMI system, and the system pops in and out of the dashboard like we've seen out of other Audi models. The A6 has long been known for a very accommodating back seat, and although we do have this window line that does drop towards the rear, the roof line itself does not actually drop, meaning that I can actually sit very upright in this rear seat and my head is not touching the ceiling. You've likely heard many journalists talking about Audis and how they can feel front heavy at times, including myself. I've definitely said that before. And it is true. Just by the very nature of Audi's Quattro design in the A4, A5, A6, A7, A8, etc., the entire engine is in front of the front axle. And this engine is a 3-liter supercharged V6, which is fairly heavy, all hanging out in front of the front axle. Even though the A6 comes in front-wheel drive form, if you check the box for all-wheel drive, you no longer have a front-wheel biased vehicle. You actually have a rear biased vehicle, because this does use exactly the same 8-speed ZF automatic transmission as the BMW 5 Series does. The difference is that this transmission is positioned a little bit differently in the vehicle. So the BMW 5 Series, the transmission is actually quite far back in the engine compartment. In this vehicle, a small portion of the transmission actually sits in front of the front axle. However, Audi has programmed this all-wheel drive system to give us a rear power bias. So this actually is going to handle a little bit more like a rear-wheel drive vehicle that happens to be a little heavy up front. Now, the front-heavy nature of the A6 is most noticeable out on winding mountain roads like we're on right here, where the speeds are relatively low, but you are definitely going a little bit quick for the tight corner, because you can feel the front end of the A6 start to push in those corners in a way that you would not see in something like a Jaguar XF, a BMW 5 Series, Mercedes-Benz E-Class, etc. Audi attempts to compensate for this by designing this platform to shift some of the weight to the rear, but they also give this very wide tires. The model we're taking a look at here has 255 with relatively sticky tires, and that definitely helps. It really helps improve both the braking as well as the handling scores. When it comes to acceleration, you can tell that this engine is not quite as torquey as some of those other engines out there, most notably something like the Cadillac CTS V Sport. And acceleration does happen a little bit slower than the competition. It's about 0.2 of a second slower or so than a 535i xDrive, and about 0.4 of a second slower than a Jaguar XF, and that would be that new 2016 XF that is almost all aluminum. Interestingly enough, Audi did not have to make the suspension terribly stiff in order to give this the handling numbers that we're seeing in this vehicle. That does help out the ride. It actually is fairly well composed. Overall, I like the driving dynamics of the A6. Now, I have to admit that rear-wheel drive driving dynamics are superior to what we're getting in this A6 in terms of overall feel as well as absolute track performance. However, personally, I would buy an all-wheel drive car like this with a rear-wheel bias before I would buy a true rear-wheel drive car. Of course, the other really nice thing about all-wheel drive is I like being able to just pull out in an intersection like this, floor it with all those ponies going on, and not have to worry about traction. You really don't have to worry about that sort of thing when you have an all-wheel drive system that's always on, like we're getting in this Quattro system. You can just floor it around corners like that, no drama, no fuss, all you get is acceleration. Audi has long priced their products very aggressively compared to BMW and Mercedes, and that continues for the A6. This has a lot of standard features that we don't find on the competition, like standard 3-zone climate control, the xenon headlamps, leather seats, not pleather like we find in most vehicles in this category, heated seats, XM radio, and an iPod interface. They're all standard. Now, admittedly, for $46,200, you do get a front-wheel drive A6, and the BMW and the Mercedes all start in rear-wheel drive formats. The 3-liter supercharged version that we're taking a look at here started at $57,400. As we have equipped right here, it's about $66,000. Most of the rear-wheel drive entries in this segment will outhandle and deliver better feel than the A6 out on the road. It's all down to the weight balance, because even though the majority of the power is sent to the rear in this vehicle, the front is still a little bit heavier than most entries. That is, of course, excluding that base A6 model, which will handle very differently than the base model from almost all the competition, except basically Volvo and Acura. This is where the value proposition starts to come in, because this is significantly less expensive than a comparably equipped E-Class. It's between $5,000 and $8,000 depending on how you configure it. And that's a decent amount of money, and it doesn't handle $5,000 to $8,000 worse than a Mercedes. It's only a very small difference, to be honest. Now, something like the Jaguar XF or the Cadillac CTS will actually be the best handling and best feeling vehicles in this particular category. The Lexus GS is probably a close third. I would actually place those above the BMW 5 Series. The reasons are several-fold. The XF has a very, very light body. It's about 400 pounds lighter than the vehicle we're taking a look at here. It's made primarily out of aluminum, and that really does help the weight balance and the general weight of the vehicle. The Lexus GS is a very, very well-sorted vehicle. It's terribly slow compared to most entries because it does have a naturally aspirated engine, but it does have a very, very good handling feel. The Cadillac CTS is a vehicle full of highs and lows. The base engine, that 2-liter turbocharged engine, is mated with a 6-speed automatic transmission, basically the only 6-speed left in this category, and the interior is not quite as nice as most entries in this segment. But by the time you get up to something like a Cadillac CTS V Sport, it's much more dynamic than most entries in this segment. Definitely faster and more dynamic than a BMW 535i for right around the same price. This 3-liter supercharged model is quite interesting because it's one of the few supercharged vehicles in the luxury segment. Only Jaguar really is as dedicated to supercharging, especially supercharging V6 engines, as Audi seems to be. Now, rumor mill tells us that this engine might be replaced with the twin turbocharged engine we recently saw in the brand new Audi S4, but we don't really have too many details on that yet. Now, Jaguar does eke out a little bit more power from their supercharged V6, either 340 horsepower or 380 horsepower, and that vehicle is lighter. That means that performance is actually going to be slightly better over there in that Jaguar. Although the Hyundai Genesis is not a luxury branded vehicle, it is decent competition with this A6. It's just a little bit larger than this. It does have a 5-liter V8 engine under the hood for about the same price as the model we're testing right here, and the performance is incredible in that particular vehicle. Now, it is very, very thirsty in terms of fuel economy compared to this, but it does have a slightly larger and in some ways a slightly nicer interior. We don't have the same level of luxury features in all those models, like we can't get the 4-zone climate control we have in the back of this particular model, but overall it is an incredible value. Hyundai Genesis aside, however, the A6 is probably one of the best values in this particular segment. So if you're looking for a solid luxury branded vehicle with good driving dynamics, the A6 is definitely going to be a solid choice, especially if you value all-wheel drive. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes with thetruthaboutcars.com, and this has been the 2016 Audi A6. Go to thetruthaboutcars.com for daily news, reviews, and more, and I will see you next week.